introduction to project management. So just a little bit about me. Obviously, I introduced myself yesterday on Friday, but just to add a little bit more is in my previous role before I came to Loughborough and the one before that, I was actually involved in project management of EU projects particularly. So I've done that for probably about 4 years of my life. So I've got some experience in this area. I'm also currently an interim project manager for one of our big programs that's not EU. It's actually funded by our aid program at the moment, and it's £40 million. So it's a very, very big project. So I have got a lot of experience of working with partners and pulling things together and making sure things happen. But the other thing I want to say about project management before I start is that it's not just about the project once it's awarded. For me, writing the grant application and managing all those partners is a project in itself, and applying project management skills and techniques to doing that can be really, really helpful. So just bear that in mind as well. It's not just about when you get the projects awarded. So I wanted to start with why project management is important. It's a very common role, it's very across everything, but some people just don't kind of go back to the basics with it. So the first part is particularly around research. Research is very complicated. It often doesn't have a set structure, and it also doesn't go the way you often plan it to. And research often goes a bit awry, or doesn't quite go in the direction you want it to, which is why project management of research is really important to kind of figure out how to resolve issues, building contingency planning and all that type of thing to make sure that when research doesn't go the way it's planned, you still can deliver a project in some form. And the other thing is research projects and EU projects as well are very individual. No two projects are the same at all. And while the fundamentals of managing them can be very similar, the work that takes place in them, the project partners, all that type of thing is very, very different. So it's important to have a kind of a toolbox, I'll call it, of techniques and things that you can apply to different situations, but not be completely rigid in how you apply them, because they are very varied and they can be quite different. Project management makes sure you've got a really clear plan of what it is the project's going to do, that you can share with the team so that everyone understands what their obligations are and they're all on the same page in terms of delivery. It helps you to estimate and allocate time and resources for the project as well. And again, this allows you to respond when things don't go quite the way you plan them to. And it also prevents things going wrong. And you can't prevent everything, but it can mitigate against them in some capacity. The only situation I've seen where you really can't mitigate is the COVID thing and not being able to travel. And I can't imagine many projects have been able to mitigate against that, but we've figured out ways and, we've got through it. So, but usually there's a way you can mitigate against these in some way, but I'll talk about risk management a little bit later. So the first question I have for you is, what is a grant? So if anyone wants to type in the chat, first of all, what they think are characteristics of a grant compared to another type of project. Do we have any comments, Miroslav?
Again, me calling me. Okay. Sorry, I was managing the what was the question? Just sorry.
They're supposed to be typing in the chat box. What is a grant?
What is a grant?
Has anyone typed anything?
Overall lump sum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of the money that we get to implement the project, the whole consortium.
Yeah.
Come on, colleagues and friends. I know that you know this one. Go ahead. Exactly, money.
Anything else?
Funding to do something that is in the interest of the funder. Nicely put, Manfred. Thank you very much. Yes, Dragana, we understood the Cyrillic. Money, exactly. Great.
The money that gives us the grant sponsor to implement. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, it is money.
Yeah.
But it's non-commercial money, and this is where it's really important. It's not for commercial activity, it's for research and development activity, which means that I'll come on to that in a moment, actually. But yes, you're right. It's for the achievement of an objective forming part of policy. So if it's a regional funder or a national funder or a European funder, it's based around a policy or a strategy that's been determined by that funder. So it's not just a random project that someone wants to do. It fits in with strategy of other funders. The only difference here, and this is a very UK thing, is some of our research funders in the UK have what they call discovery science funding, where you can submit really fundamental research ideas, let's say for physics, for example, and it doesn't necessarily fit with a specific area that the funder's looking to fund. But what it does do is fit under their strategic priority to support discovery science, they call it, and fundamental science. So there's usually some kind of link to policy or strategy as well. It supports the implementation of an action. So there might be other things alongside the payment that help you. So for example, the EU have a lot of dissemination platforms that if you have an EU grant, you then have access to. And this is a really important point. If you get a grant, you're autonomous and you're the owner of the project and its results. The funder can direct you, but you as the project owner, it's your project to deliver and make sure you deliver it. So I'll put that there as well. And the final part is it's accountable to whoever's giving you the money, and it has to respect the rules and regulations of the funder. And this is where project management gets a bit tricky, in my opinion, because different funders have different rules and regulations, and you have to do different things for them. So, for example, in the UK, we find EU rules and regulations a bit complicated compared to our national funding. It's very, very different. Adam, I'm going to pick on you. They're quite different when we do EU projects, aren't they, compared to UK projects?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, they've just got different rules, particularly around the funding and what we can and can't do. And also the reporting requirements are much stricter as well for EU projects. Is there anything else, or is that probably?
I think the main thing from my side is the different funding requirements, the different terms and conditions, but yes, so that varied. So yeah, the gulf between them.
Thank you. Cool, so that's the grant bit. And then I'm going to come on to project management. So I found this quote online, which is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to manage project activities from the start to the finish with a goal of meeting the project requirements. And this is kind of back what I said at the beginning. It's about knowing and understanding what tools you have available and applying them in the right way to make sure your project delivers what you say you're going to. It doesn't mean that every tool that you have or know how to use is suitable at that point, but it gives you a lot of options in order to be able to consider how to manage the project. Okay, so there's some very specific challenges, in my opinion, around managing EU projects compared to other types of projects, because they are very specific and they are very different, and they also cut across countries. So there's a number of challenges. So the first one, which I think is really important, is working with partners from other countries. So if you've not done that before, it can be quite unusual and quite a different way of working. I personally love it, but not everybody does. So I wanted to ask the question, just put it out there. So if you've worked with partners from other countries, particularly other European countries, what are the main difficulties that you've come across in the last few years, I'll say?
Okay, again, Mia. Okay, so what are the main difficulties? So you have the EU law, and you need to reconcile all national laws. It's a really multi consortium from multi countries, right? From different countries, and sometimes it's really difficult. They have their national laws, their institutional laws, and then you need to put that all under the EU law. So there's a why are the EU project then difficult? You have from my perspective, I have some administrative workload for the institution, then for the country, then for the EU funding. So when you combine that, there's a lot of documents and administrative processes. For example, EU has to have the joint procurement system in the Western Balkan, and every country in the Western Balkan have a different procurement law. So you cannot organize a joint. Then we needed to explain that to them. So there's a lot of difficulties in implementing the project, but there's different countries.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Anyone else?
I would maybe share that it's not really to emphasize it as a difficulty, but something to be careful about. It's the cultural differences and the usual way that the work is done in some countries. There are some countries which are known for discipline, and you know what I mean. And there are others which can go really easy on everything, tends to be late and have this relaxed attitude. So, well, the truth is somewhere in the middle, I guess. But this is something we definitely need to be mindful of, not in a bad way, but to be able to mitigate those little differences and keep the community happy, I would say. That's a skill in its own, I guess.
I absolutely agree with that. I've had a few experience over the last few years of working with India, and yeah, they don't really have deadlines in India. It's not really something to have, you know. They just kind of like muddle along and do it when they do it. And that was a real, they trying to explain to them, no, this is when the deadline is, and you cannot be later than that. It just didn't mean anything to them at all. So that was really interesting.
Yeah. And I would wish to share that we have one thank you from our dear colleague who is an EXtremeClimTwin partner, Manfred, who says thank you. And I know why he says it. Yes, we definitely agree on this. It's nice to respect deadlines and to respect the corporate culture of one project, but we are the ones creating it. So I think as long as it's on a friendly basis and openness, everything will go well. Yeah.
I wanted to add up on Claire. So India, for example, to issue mandate from a Chinese university, it's really difficult. It's like 3 months process for them. Yeah. They don't just go to the rector and knock on the doors and ask for a mandate. It's a really long procedure for them. So this is the cultural dimension, and I think their regulations and work of operating you need to take into account when you develop the application. You need, this is what we're talking about with the UK partner, your process of approving one project, and you need to know the rules of a game, how it's played.
Absolutely, yeah.
Please, dear colleagues, feel free to share your experience. Yeah. Let's just not be us from the EXtremeClimTwin team, because we are nerdy and we just want to participate. Just feel free to speak up, and thank you for that.
Yeah, just pop it in the chat or just speak up. Like if you've worked with a particular country and you found they had to work in a particular way, like I found working with I've worked with some Scandinavian partners as well, and they are very strict with the deadlines, and they deliver exactly what they said they were going to do, exactly when they said they were going to do it. And then you work with the Italian partners who are a little bit more relaxed about the whole situation and don't yeah, it can be a bit late, it's fine in Italy. So yeah, but we had some quite big personality clashes as well, particularly with weirdly English partners. Just yeah, some academics in the UK can be difficult to work with. Not so much at Loughborough, but some of the other universities, they can have quite big egos, and that it's their way and that's how it should be done, you know. You probably get that elsewhere as well. So cool. Does anyone else have anything else to add? Okay, if anyone comes up with anything, just shout up or pop it in the chat. So I'm just going to give some top tips working with UK universities, because that's where I work. So I thought it'd be useful that if you ever work with a UK university, here's some pointers for you. And maybe Goga, you could give us some back with respect to working with Serbian universities afterwards. That would be really helpful for us. So the first part is UK universities can be quite bureaucratic. We've got specific processes and we have to do things in a very specific way. It doesn't mean that we're difficult to work with, but sometimes it can really slow things down. So for example, some of the contract things that Adam spoke about the other day, they need escalating and approvals, and you have to wait until certain committees meet or certain people are available to approve whatever it is you've asked for. But in addition to that, also on Friday, I spoke about approvals processes of grant applications. We can't just pull together a grant application in the UK and just give you some numbers. We have to put it through our process and make sure that we've costed it correctly and had it approved by the school where the proposal's being submitted. So it's typically it's just worth bearing in mind that sometimes these processes can take a little bit of time. So if you want to work with a UK partner, the more notice you can give them, the more helpful that is, to be honest, and it helps not slow things down. So the second point is staff in UK universities, particularly support staff, tend to have very specific roles and might need to work with other colleagues to get the information you might need. So I'll give you a good example of that is if I was supporting a grant application and you needed some information about ethics, because maybe we're doing some stuff with some people and some surveys, I can't do that because I'm not an ethics expert. I have to go and speak to my colleague who works on ethics. And the same, if you want to talk to me about open access publications, again, that's not my specialism, but we have somebody at the university who is a specialist on that. So I would go and talk to them. So often it's not a case of we can just do everything or know everything that's going on about a particular topic. And we have to talk to people that are more specialist in that particular area. And Adam has the same with his contract, in certain contractual situations, he needs to go and ask some advice from the legal team as well. So, because we're quite specialist individual roles, we have to go and ask for that extra help. So point number 3, this is really important. We get an awful lot of emails in our jobs in the UK. I'd imagine you're the same, but my goodness, some of the academics are getting like 200-300 emails a day. They're balancing the students, they're getting emails from their students and from their school and from the research office. And it's an awful lot of emails for them to go through. So they can get lost is what I'm trying to say. So don't be afraid to nag English staff to do and British staff on what you need from them. Send them a reminder. I asked you to do this. Have you had a chance to have a look at it yet? Or give them a call, it's a big deal and it causes a lot of stress in the UK, to be honest. Just for information as well, in the UK, we typically have lunch sometime between 12 and 2, normally. It depends on the individual, but that's normally the time most people take lunch. And working hours are usually between 9 and 5:30. They can vary a little bit, and they have done obviously during the pandemic, but typically most people start around 9. You do get crazy people like me and Adam who start really early, but on average, most people start around 9. And also lots of people will take 2 weeks of leave between mid-July and the end of August, but we don't take the whole of August off. We're not like a lot of Europe where we're not available during August. There will always be people around during August, so you will always be able to get in touch with us. And also most universities close between Christmas and the New Year, so don't expect much to happen around that time. And also around Easter as well, because we have some additional closure days. A lot of people take quite a lot of holiday around Easter as well. So actually, Christmas and Easter are more likely to be the times that things don't progress rather than during the summer. So just so you're aware of that really as well. UK university staff know UK funding rules pretty well because that's like what we do and that's our lifeblood, that's what we do day in, day out. But they don't always know about funders outside of the UK, and they might need some help in understanding the guidance on what can and cannot be applied for. We're pretty okay with EU funding because we do a reasonable amount of that. But for example, if there was some Serbian funding that you wanted us to be a partner on, we wouldn't necessarily know the rules. So we would need to work with you to understand what we could and couldn't do, especially if the information's not in English, because we don't speak many other languages in the UK, unfortunately. Okay, so note 7, sorry. So academics at UK universities are really, really busy. They have to balance teaching and research and enterprise activity and committees and various administrative roles that they have within their departments. So they can't always respond quickly, particularly not if they're doing lab work or full day field work or whatever it might be, depending on their discipline. So they might not always get back to you as quickly as you would like. Number 8 is my favourite. The weather in the UK gets really bad during January and February, and it's really dark all the time. So a lot of us get really grumpy and fed up and miserable. Is that right, Adam? Were you the same?
It has been known, Claire, yes.
Yeah. So just be nice to us that time of year, because it's just a bit rubbish to be in the UK that time of year. It's cold and dark and it's just horrible. So just bear with us. Google Translate can be super helpful if you are struggling with English. So I ended up writing a proposal with a Nicaraguan partner using purely Google Translate. So I would write my emails to them in English and they would translate them in Google Translate, and then they would respond to me in I think it was Spanish, yeah, and then I would use Google Translate to figure out what they were trying to say, and we managed to write a proposal together by some miracles. So if you're struggling with English, that's one way you can do it, and it does work. And the final part is funding applications from UK universities typically need approving by senior management within the organisation. So please build this into your timescale planning. You know, EU projects are particularly big, and for example, any proposal where we are receiving over £1 million, we have to get approval from our Pro Vice Chancellor for research. He has to say, yeah, that's fine, you can submit that, as well as the school approving it. So we just need to build those timescales into whatever we're doing. I think he needs a couple of weeks notice to be able to approve it. So it's important to just bear that in mind. So that's the UK. Goga, do you want to add some about working with Serbia?
Well, thank you, Claire. I think that you covered most of the points, and I guess we can all well agree with those. Maybe not that much with lunch hours, because it pretty much stretches throughout the day, and we tend to have later lunch. But yeah, pretty much the same. But again, I have to say it's up to a person. We can't really generalize. There are people who are this and that, but yeah, pretty much the same around the academic world. I don't know.
What about the summer? What about the summer? Is that different?
Well, July is alive and kicking pretty much, but yeah, you're right. August gets really sleepy and slow, and it's nice to have a break at the time. So we are working. Yeah, we don't have Ferragosto like Italians, but pretty much relaxed, and maybe with shorter working hours. So it's more pleasant in summer, I have to say. We need that break, all of us. Thanks.
Great. Does anyone else want to add anything? No? Oh, very good. You sound like you're going to be very easy to work with. Okay, so the next part I want to talk about is why do projects fail or go wrong? Because this is the bit we want to try and avoid when we do project management. So the main bit is the goal or the vision of the project isn't defined properly. And so if everyone's not understanding what they're trying to achieve, it's very likely that things might go wrong. It's also about change management. So as I mentioned before, research projects change. They don't always go in a very linear way. So having some kind of change management process or discussion or whatever it might be is really important in terms of making sure projects are successful. Poor or non-existent planning. So you write your work plan in your proposal and you think it's great, but then you just go with that and you don't then plan it anymore in any more detail, and that's where things can get quite challenging. The project isn't resourced as planned. So this is a bit of a problem that we sometimes have. around recruitment. So if you've got research associates working on your project, you know, junior researchers, sometimes you need to go out and recruit them. They may be on fixed term contracts, maybe they leave halfway through the project. It can be quite challenging sometimes with those types of roles to keep them for the whole project. So it's not always a problem, but sometimes it can be problematic. Lack of coordination of activities. So I would like to say that our Servian partners have done a great job at coordinating so far. So that's been a delight. But I have worked on some projects where the coordinator's not like so busy and not really engaged and isn't really clear what their expectations are. They haven't got a project manager involved, and it can get quite messy. So to me, that's something that's really important. The project reporting is inadequate or does not exist. So if you don't have reporting, you can't monitor progress, and then you don't know where you're at, and then maybe you don't deliver what you said you were going to. And the final one, which I think is really important, is lack of ownership over the project tasks. So it's very clear who should be doing what, but if somebody won't take ownership or leadership of what they're supposed to be doing, then it's kind of difficult to try and get it done. And then all that responsibility falls back on either the project manager or the coordinator, and that can be really difficult for that person to manage. So these are kind of important things to try and avoid where possible. So some, but not all projects have a project manager on them. In the UK, we typically would put a project manager on a grant that's bigger than probably £1 million or like 1.3 million euros. Any less than that, usually the academic takes the lead on it. We try and always put a project manager on any EU projects that we're coordinating, because they are quite complicated and very different. So we do try and do that. But yeah, we don't typically put project managers on a lot of our smaller projects. But the role is really important. So the first sentence is a little bit long here, but the project manager is responsible for organising the project, making sure, like planning meetings and making sure that everything's kind of on track, ensuring that activities are implemented according to the time plan. So is everything on time? Are things late? Making sure that it's within the budget that was agreed, so we're not spending too much or too little, because that can be problematic as well, and achieving the results that are planned, while also ensuring that the rules and the procedures for the project and from the funder are respected at all points during that. So the types of rules and procedures that sometimes we talk about are things like procurement can be one of those. There are very specific procurement rules. If you want to get a subcontractor to do a particular piece of work, you have to follow whatever procurement rules are in place. And again, around reporting and submission of deliverables and that kind of thing as well. And the project manager is often the intermediary for communications between the partners and the funder. So often the funder will liaise directly with the project manager about concerns or things they need to raise in relation to the project. And then there's the project manager's responsibility to make sure the partners understand what's been communicated and are able to respond effectively. The project manager should be able to act as a driving force to manage the team to make sure that the project objectives are being achieved. So basically, it's a lot of nagging and telling people what they need to do by when, and reminding people what's due when. So there's a lot of that involved in the position, which is why your people skills are important here as well. And they have defined responsibilities and often coordinate tasks and make sure that everyone's kind of doing what they should. They take responsibility for oversight of the project finances to make sure that spend is on track and everyone is spending what they're supposed to be. And they prepare reports for the funder and also for any internal management groups or meetings or anything, you know, if somebody wants a yeah, okay, brilliant.
Thanks.
Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is project management tools, because these are really useful things that can be used to manage a project well and effectively. So I'm going to run through each of these. I've got a big list here, and hopefully they'll be useful. What I've done on each slide, I just found a random picture that represented it. It's not at all necessarily the best way to do it, but what I often do is if I need to come up with like a diagram or a Gantt chart or something for a project, I'll often have a look on like Google Images to see what other ones look like. It just gives me some ideas and it can be really helpful, particularly if you don't have access to other projects, to look at what they've got in place. So that's that. Okay, great. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Microsoft Excel. Microsoft Excel is your best friend when it comes to project management because it can do pretty much everything you need it to do. It can track things, it can track your finances, it can track resources. You can make it do whatever you need it to do. Adam is like a pro on Microsoft Excel. He's come up with all sorts of spreadsheets to track all sorts of different things. So if you've got any more questions about that, you can ask Adam. But what I really like about it is you can almost set up like a whole project management structure in Excel. So you can have like a dashboard on a front sheet, and you can use all the sheets behind it to have all the different data for your project. So it can work really well. And the other thing is, like, I've learned Excel from using it, not from actually going on any courses and actually being taught how to use it. So it's really helpful to think about what you're going to use it for, and then go on YouTube or Google and search up what you're going to use it for. And then there's always instructions about how to do everything, because some of it's really complicated. And there's instructions on how to do different things and how to implement different things. So it's just really easy, really intuitive, and there's lots of instructions on how to use it. So that's my first piece of advice, is get familiar with Excel, set up some nice templates of things you can use for your project, and don't be afraid to evolve them as well as your project progresses. So you might go, oh, that's worked really well. Oh no, now I want to change this. And that's totally okay. If you do make changes to it though, be really careful with your formulas. Because sometimes if you make changes, your formulas can go a bit squiffy. So just double check those and check they're correct. Adam, have you got any more Excel tips for project management?
I don't think I've really got any tips that I can say other than to be as creative as you can. So I think quite often I build things that I possibly future-proof things a little bit too much and do them a little bit too complicated. But I agree with Claire, it is a fantastic tool to use.
Thanks, Adam. So that's Excel. This is a terrible picture, I'm very sorry. I'm going to talk about Gantt charts a little bit. So when we submitted this project proposal, it had a Gantt chart in it, because all EU projects have a Gantt chart in them. But it's usually quite a high level Gantt chart that you put in the proposal. It's not very detailed, but I find they can be really useful for tracking progress, particularly where you've got multiple partners and multiple work packages and long projects that you need to deliver by when. So for an EU project, I would typically do a Gantt chart with months along the top, because they tend to be about 3 years, so 36 months. So you can track by month. But for shorter projects, you might want to do it weekly or every 2 weeks, or whatever it might be most appropriate for your project. And you can also do things like having a Gantt chart per partner that might feed into an overall Gantt chart for the project. You might have a detailed Gantt chart per work package that then feeds up into a more a higher level Gantt chart for the project as well. But for me, it's a really good way of visually representing what's needed to be done by when. And you can mark things on it as well, like key meetings or milestones, or when deliverable reports are due. So it can be really helpful visual representation of where the project's at, which is then helpful for any management groups or anything, because you can put it forward for them. So I really like Gantt charts. I think they're really helpful. So I wanted to talk about that quite a bit. Okay, this is another example of a Gantt chart that's a little bit more straightforward. But again, you've just got to figure out what's best and what's more appropriate for your project and what it is you're doing. Okay, I'm going to talk about risk management now. So the EU are quite big on risk management, and in your proposal, you have to talk about risk a little bit and how you're going to mitigate against the key risks in your project. And that's fine at the proposal stage, but it's really important that once the project starts, that this risk log is updated and maintained, because things change over time. So if you'd have asked us when we wrote the proposal whether we would have put COVID in here, absolutely not. But by the time the project started, you know, the pandemic's quite a big deal now for the project because it stopped us traveling and doing the workshops in person. So that's much more likely to be prominent on the risk log in terms of having an impact on the project, and the mitigation mechanisms that might need to be put in place to make sure that the impact is minimized. So all sorts of things can go on here, like research assistants leaving, other staff leaving, you know, problems with publishing, problems with storing data, all sorts of things can go on here. And it just means you've got somewhere to store all this stuff. And then think about implementing mitigation measures that are appropriate for the risk. So the other thing is, with a risk log, which I like, is you can think about the probability of something actually happening, which is how likely it is, and what the impact of it would be. And it's nice to score these out of 5, so you get an idea what the impact of it would be. And then what you do is you can either add or multiply these figures together to get a rating. So for example, if you score 25, that's red. That's not a good risk to be having. So what you really need to find a way to mitigate against that to make sure it doesn't have a big impact on your project. Whereas if something's scoring sort of 4, like the top one on here, yeah, you probably need to mitigate it against it a little, but the impact on your project's pretty low, so it's probably less of a priority to consider and look at. So this is just one way to do it. There's lots of different ways to manage risk, but it's a really important part of project management because research has a lot of unknowns in it as well, so it's important to just think about how that might go. So that's risk management. Next, we have the critical path, which is if you've ever done project management training, this is like one of the really big things they bang on about. And this is understanding what activities in the project are reliant on other activities within the project. And therefore, if those are delayed, the longer term impact of that could be quite significant. Or if something is delayed, it lets you figure out what you could be doing in the meantime or at a different point in the project to actually make sure that you can still deliver what you said you were going to deliver. So this is just a picture of how it might look. When I've done project management training at the university, they make us do a case study example of having to make a cup of tea and poached eggs on toast, and at the same time, and you have to figure out what order you need to do everything and what impacts what. And it's a really weird activity to do, but actually it's quite a good way to get you thinking in that mentality, you know, what would have an impact on what. So it's just important to be aware of it more than anything, so that when things do start going a bit off schedule, you can mitigate against it and make sure that you're doing the right things at the right point in the project. This is just a calendar. I love calendars because they're really visual again. What's going to happen when in the project? As a project manager, you would be responsible for a lot of this. So it's just useful to know what's happening when, make sure you've got your timings right for everything so that you can plan a little bit. And the other thing is having a calendar that other people within the team can see, so they also know what's happening when and what's due then, can also be really helpful, so that everyone's on the same page with what the project is doing and by when. So none of these are particularly complicated, as you can see. It's just the implementation of it that can be somewhat more challenging sometimes, depending on the complexity of the project. I love this one. So this is a project dashboard, and you can create these in Excel, and there are instructions how to do it if you want to. But I personally find these really, really helpful. So you can see where you're at in terms of what tasks have been completed that should have been completed by when, how far through the project you are and how much of the work's been completed, how long through the project you are, how are you doing in terms of budget, what's been spent, what's remaining, what tasks are maybe a bit later, what deadlines are coming up, and what and who's working on what. So this is just an example of what one might look like, but it's really helpful just to kind of have that visually to hand. And then say you can create the Excel worksheets that fit behind this, and this can almost be your cover sheet so you can track progress on the project. So it takes time to set up, but then it's super helpful to have it to hand so you can just check it quite often. So that's really good, especially where you don't have any project management systems in place, like online, if you've not got any software or anything. I mean, we don't even have that at Loughborough. We don't have project management software, so it's a useful thing to do. This is a resource chart. So who's going to be working on what and when? EU projects are a little bit funny in that respect, because a lot of people kind of work on them just throughout. But for example, for myself and Adam, we're not doing that. We're kind of doing quite intense chunks and then not doing a bit for a while and then coming back and doing another bit and then going away again. So our work's more sporadic than perhaps some of the other people on the project. And it just lets you see sort of how many days you might be expecting from each person per month, and just making sure they're doing that, really. So it just helps you manage the resources of what you need to do. But that also links really closely to the budget as well. So if you know how many days someone's doing, you know how much that's going to cost and what the impact of that is on the budget of the programme. And then the final one I wanted to just talk about was about internal communications within the project team. So it's really important to think about that, because, as I say, lots of people get lots of emails all the time, and it's really hard to keep on top of everything. So this is just an example of what types of communication you might want and when. So it's really useful to have a plan around how this might work. So a project status report might be a weekly email to the coordinator of the project to sort of just go, this is where we're at, this is the risk log, nothing's really changed, or this has come up, which we haven't done before, and I've got a few concerns about it, so perhaps we need to look at this. So it's just having that regular communication. There might be team meetings, so we might do those quarterly or 6 monthly. It just, again, depends on the project. And those might be verbal updates. There might be task progress updates. This is a bit extreme, this version, which you might want weekly from the project team, how they're getting on with a particular task, how's that going for them, do they need any additional resources or support. Project review points at key milestones during the project. So there's different types of communication. And the other thing is, it's really important to think about who those communications are going to. Your project coordinator is probably going to want quite in-depth information about the program and how it's running and what's happening where and when and how. But somebody delivering on a particular task, they're not so bothered at that point what else is going on in the project necessarily. So you're more getting information from them rather than updating them. So it's just thinking about who you're working with and what you need from them and what they're likely to need from you. But if you can get this right and get it working really well, it's a really effective way of managing the project, because everyone knows what's going on and everyone's really clear what they're supposed to be doing. So those are some of the tools that I think are really useful. So there's also a whole bunch of online project management tools that are out there. There's like millions of them. So I was just going to ask, has anyone used any that they found really good or helpful in terms of managing work or projects? So again, you can type it in the chat and Miroslav and Gogo will read it out.
Come on, project managers. I know you manage some projects. Tell us your experiences.
So Outlook counts. You know, creating tasks in Outlook, that's an example of a project management tool you might use.
Slack, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We use Slack, for example, if there's a lot of people involved in a project. For the cost networks, for example, we use the Slack for the work groups to discuss about the progress, the workload, and everything.
I found Slack really good, actually. Again, yeah, we've got a project with like 100 partners on it, and it's brilliant for that because of all the channels and the way it works. And it also takes away from the email traffic as well, which is brilliant in my opinion. So yeah, I think Slack's great.
Yeah, and you can easily follow up everything.
Yeah,
it's better than the emails, to go through the emails and everything. So
yeah, absolutely.
For finances, we use the mostly use the Excel spreadsheet. So.
We have actually tried using Trello on EXtremeClimTwin, and we didn't get that far, I have to say, unfortunately, but it is a good way to keep your project on track. It's a good way to get everybody participating. It's a good way to see when and who does the changes and who contributes to the task accomplishment, and you can sort out the activities like in progress, not started yet, closed, and it's a neat and visually very pleasant, user-friendly interface. I like it personally.
Yeah, I like Trello as well.
Yeah. It didn't live up to our expectations in our project, but I guess it's still manageable because it's a small consortium and we can manage things on basic and regular tools, I'd say.
Brilliant. Anyone else got anything that they've used? Oh, it's very quiet today. I'll have to do some exercises later, get everyone running around. So the biggest thing I'm going to say before using any of these, I've got a whole list of them, which I'll share with you in a moment, is buy-in. So we use Slack for, as I said, for one of our big projects. It's taken quite a while to get everyone onto using it. Now they're all on it and using it. It's brilliant, and they're really engaged and they use it every day and they keep it open and they respond and stuff. But it has taken a little while to get everyone using it in the right way. And the other thing is, don't use too many. So decide what you're using and kind of stick with it. Because if you start having, we're going to use Slack for this, and we're going to use Trello for this, and then we're going to use email for this, and then I've got another calendar in Google Calendars that it's just going to really mess with people because they're going to have like 75 logins for different websites, and they're just not going to check them. So try and use 1 or 2 as a maximum, because it's just too complicated otherwise. If you want to use more just for yourself, like just so you can use them to keep on track of stuff, that's absolutely fine. But don't expect a big team, particularly of academics, to be using a whole load of new software on loads of different sites. So here's some that we've used and that are available online that I'm aware of. The nice thing now is we've got Microsoft Teams as well, which is also really good. So there's quite a lot you can do in Teams now as well, around like setting up a team and allocating tasks and all sorts of things in Teams. But I'm not so familiar with how that works. But there's loads of different things you can use, and that's the problem in a way. There's too many out there, so finding one that's fit for purpose for you and your project can be a bit more challenging. I have heard really good things about Monday.com, and I know that one of my colleagues at Loughborough is using it for one of their EU projects in terms of managing it. But as I say, the most important thing is pick one and stick with it. Don't just keep flipping around, because that's just going to make life more complicated for everybody. And it might be, as a project manager, you need to like try a few and do some free trials to figure out the functionality of them and whether it will work for your project. And not all of these will do everything either. So like Slack's great for communication and probably sharing documents, but you can't like track your budget and stuff on it and that kind of thing. So it just depends what it is you want to get out of the system that you're using, really. So that's my biggest pieces of advice there. But hopefully that's useful. Document management. So you probably found this when you're writing proposals as well, is version control and document management. Now, luckily, the days of these big, lovely folders that I've got on the screen are pretty much behind us now for the most part. But it's really important to have somewhere where all documents are saved and backed up. So it might be you use like a OneDrive system within your organization that can be shared, or some other kind of document system like Google Docs or whatever it is, where everything for the project is saved and stored, so it's all in one place. So it can just get really complicated in terms of what's where. And it might be, as a project manager, you actually have 2. You might have your own on your own computer, and another one that is open for everyone to access and use, so that people aren't changing things as you go. It just depends on your relationships with your partners and also how big the project is. But it can be pretty annoying when someone accidentally deletes something that you've spent a long time working on. So yeah, just there's different ways again of storing those documents, but just making sure they're accessible by everyone that's working on the project so that they're in a central place. Project manuals, not always necessary. Again, it depends on the size and the scale of the project. So for EXtremeClimTwin, we're all right. We're not a huge group, so it's not so necessary. But where you've got like a project with 100 partners, like a cost action or the project that I'm working on, it becomes absolutely necessary, particularly where the funder requirements are very strict. So a project manual can just provide information to people about what they need to do in different situations, when reporting is due, and it just provides somewhere where they can go and check what might be due when, or what they need to do about a particular situation. It might include your risk log for the whole project, and then people can just go in and update it as new things come up, and you know, it can be a good place to save these things. So it's just a very useful thing to have for running particularly a big complex project. And there's all sorts of things you can include in it as well. Meetings, everyone's favorite thing. But you can't run a project without them, unfortunately. So I've been in a lot of projects where meetings have just been held for meeting's sake, and it's pointless to me. So it's really important to consider what's appropriate for the project and at what level. So you might have a management group for your project, and you might have like task groups and work package groups and all sorts. So making sure those meetings are at the right time, at the right level, and making sure you know who needs to be involved in them as well. They don't all have to be in person. I think one thing the last year's taught us is that actually these virtual meetings actually work really, really well. And travel's great, and it's really important to meet people in person, absolutely. But does it need to happen every time? Probably not. So there are benefits to both. So it's thinking about what might be most appropriate for the particular situation you're in. If you're talking about kind of the high level management meetings as well, you've got a lot of people there that are probably very, very busy and are maybe working on the project for a small proportion of their time. So actually an online meeting might be better, because then you're not invading in their time in terms of travel and making them move around. So yeah, it's just weighing that up. And again, a lot of this is about appropriateness for what it is you're doing. And the final point I'm going to make on meetings is make sure they've got a purpose. So people's time is really valuable, and there's nothing worse than sitting in a meeting just because someone decided a meeting was a really good idea. Make sure there's a really clear agenda and a clear kind of what should be the outcomes of the meeting, so that it's got real purpose. Okay, so that's kind of probably all I've got to say on meetings. You'll be pleased to know I'm probably going to finish this session early, so because all of you are very quiet, I thought you might say some more during this. Budget management. So this is super, super important, budget management. So I could go into this for probably hours, but I'm not going to. But as a project manager, it's really important to maintain a view on the budget. So where is it? What's been spent? Everything. What have you got available? Etc. etc. And again, the level of oversight you have should be appropriate to the size and complexity of the project. So for a big European project, you probably want to be looking at it maybe monthly to see where things are at. For a shorter, smaller project, you might want to even look at it weekly. Can we keep the research associate on for another 3 weeks at the end, or another month at the end, you know? So just thinking about that creatively. For EU projects, your partners don't really need to send you updates officially, because they just submit them when they submit their claims to the EU. But I find it can be really helpful to get some more regular budget updates from your partners at various points during the project, so that you can check they're actually on track in terms of spend. I've worked on some projects where it was really, really clear. We worked with a Polish partner, and it was really clear, maybe like a year into the 3-year project, that they were underspending massively because their staff costs were nowhere near what they thought they were going to be for the project. And as a result, the coordinator was able to kind of come to some decisions and actually able to move some of the budget from that partner to one of the others to make sure that some other additional work could actually be undertaken. And that worked really well. But unless he didn't have that oversight and that budget reporting, he wouldn't have been able to do that. So it can be quite helpful to do. I think he did it like probably every 6 months. So I think we had a formal claim period about 18 months. So by 12 months, he had a pretty good idea with where things were kind of going and the direction they were going to be going in for the claim. So that was a really helpful thing for him to have done. And this is what I mean about potential underspends as well. You know, if it's really clear a partner's nowhere near spending what they said they were going to, and maybe their staff costs are less and not been able to spend their travel budget, you know, have a discussion to figure out a way forward. Are they actually going to be able to spend it, or would that money be better off spent on something else? So it's just worth having some of those thoughts and discussions sometimes. And I'm going to bang on about Excel as well. Excel spreadsheets are a really useful tool for managing your budget and keeping an oversight on who's spending what and when. So just use them rather than expecting, you know, people to provide everything in the right format. If things get behind or the research goes off track, so this obviously happens a lot with research and development projects. So the thing I really emphasize is talk to the funder about any major problems. If there's delays or you need to change something within the project because some research hasn't quite gone the way you thought it was going to. So for the EU projects, that would be a project officer. For national projects, you'd usually be allocated somebody who kind of looks after your project. And the first part of call is to talk to them about it. It might be you go to them with a potential solution as well. So you've already agreed between you, we think this might be a good solution, and then go to the project officer to have a chat with them about implementing that and seeing whether it's possible. But what's really going to annoy them is if you don't deliver on your project and you haven't actually told them at any point you're behind or something's not quite going to plan. That's going to really annoy them, particularly if you need to do things like putting in for extensions at the end of your project, because you know, they've got no view of that potentially coming at the end. Direct resources are the more critical components. So what are the bits that really need to happen to make the project successful, and what are the nice to haves, and maybe really focus on those essential bits if it's really gone off track as well. Avoiding blame. So these are usually collaborative projects, and don't mess up your relationships with people just because something's gone a bit wrong. Try and work together to come up with a solution, and don't be judgmental and harsh on people unless they really have literally done nothing on your project at all. Respond early. So by working with the partners and getting those regular updates from them, you can recognise issues early before they become too much of a major issue, and then be in a position to be able to respond to them early. And be flexible. So as I said right at the beginning, project management and managing projects and skills is not about being rigid about how these projects are delivered. You know, we're not developing a piece of software here for Microsoft. We're not making a new cork for a wine bottle. We're doing research here, research and development. So it's got to be flexible, and it's got to move with how things change and move going forward. And yeah, work as a team to try and resolve what the issues are. Why has it gone wrong? Is it just a case of, you know, something didn't work right, or is there a more fundamental issue like a member of staff not doing their job correctly? So it's really important to try and work together to figure out what's kind of gone wrong and resolve it at that point as well. So there's just some pointers there, but it can be really difficult when things don't quite go the way you're planning. Yeah, and it can sometimes feel like a really difficult situation to try and resolve. But if you've got a good relationship with the partners and the project coordinator and all the other people that are kind of managing the program, it should be an okay situation. So this is where the relationship skills are really important, in my opinion. Okay, dealing with difficult partners. So I'm sure we've all had these. So I just wondered if anyone's got any experiences they would like to share where they've dealt with a difficult partner and maybe what they did about it. Goga's nodding.
Yeah, well, there are always difficult partners, but we're good with this one. And it's the first coordinating project for us when it comes to Horizon 2020, of course. But I've known, I mean, I've heard many difficult situations when partners are not delivering. That's the major thing. And then you procrastinate, like poking on them and asking them, but then finally it gets nasty and you have to react, and then it's hard to keep then it's hard to be flexible and to keep the communication like low profile. Then you have to speak up and save the project, basically.
Yeah.
But I guess that being in constant communication with partners, and regardless of the fact if they think that you're nagging them or that there's too much of you in the communication, I wouldn't care for that. The tasks need to be delivered, and it's important that they know that the coordinator's eye is watching them closely.
Yeah, absolutely. Has anyone else had any experiences? I know Adam's had one.
Calling out. EXtremeClimTwin calling Adam.
Yeah. We had one, didn't we, with a contract? They were being very difficult, weren't they?
Yes, and that was a UK university as well. And there was, most of it was, we had to get a contract in place for a certain time frame, and they were just, every deadline we set for review, they would miss. And then when we sent the next copy out, it was a problematic relationship. And eventually we had to remove them from the project, although then there were certain high-level discussions and they were reinstated again. But the other thing is as well with this, this is all an informal sort of resolution. So to come back to the dispute resolution on the contracting, this is all prior to that. So it's that negotiation that
the coordinator and consortium.
So I've got some points here which might help towards that. So the first part is, I think it's really important to understand why the partner's being difficult. So in some cases it's a personality issue and you just don't get on, in which case maybe you just need a quite frank discussion about that and then put it to one side and move on. Sometimes it's them not delivering the work, but why aren't they delivering the work? Have they struggled to recruit somebody to work on the project? Have they got a whole heap of competing demands? Do you then need to create some communication with their organisation to explain why they need to be working on your project, not all the other stuff that they're supposed to be doing? So there's a whole load of small things that you can try when somebody's being difficult to try and resolve the issue. So I think if those types of things don't work, when you don't get anywhere with them, it's then the point to escalate it to the project coordinator, if it's not the project coordinator that's having the issues in the first place, or the project management board or team or whatever it might be for that particular project, and have another discussion about how to deal with it. Sometimes it might be a case of just messaging from the project coordinator along the lines of, you really need to start delivering on this, or we'll have to seek another partner to replace you, or whatever it might be. As Adam says, there are clauses in the consortium agreement around dispute resolution, so don't forget that they're there and what you wrote in them. And this kind of comes back to what Adam was talking about on Monday afternoon. Make sure these clauses are actually appropriate for your project and the dispute resolution process you've put in place is the right one for what you're doing, because you might suddenly find you need to use it and maybe it's not fit for purpose. So really make sure when you're doing your contracting that you are happy with that, because that's your get out clause if you've got a difficult partner, basically. Yeah, Adam, do you have anything to add on that around the dispute clauses?
No, I don't think there's anything specific. I mean, I'd just highlight the fact that the contract is there when everything else fails effectively. So, and also if there is an obligation for senior members of staff to get involved and to resolve issues on a more informal basis, then it's better for all parties than to end up with possible costly legal methods.
Thank you.
If I may, I will just translate the situation to our field here.
Mm-hmm.
in countries which are maybe low research performers or have this weaker network of research supporting staff. I think that we come back to basics, that people do not read the contracts and do not understand them well. It might finish on just one person's back, and that one person know what the sanctions may be and what the threat is behind, but not the entire team, maybe not even the leadership of the institution. So I would always emphasize the fact that you need to read carefully, thoroughly, even the footnotes, and understand in the first place. That would be like the bottom line.
Definitely. Well, there's also the fact that sometimes you might need to redistribute work within the consortium. If you're not happy with what they're delivering, it might be somebody else can do it. And yeah, for very serious challenges, it's worth working with a project officer to work out the best way forward. So I would say for me, it's number one, informal, trying to resolve, fix the relationship, whatever it is. Number two is your coordinator and your management group. And number three, if that's not getting anywhere, then it's your project officer. And at that point, that's where it starts to get quite serious and you start looking at the contract terms. So that for me is probably the process I would take. But it's very much dependent on individual situations. For example, if a partner's done something very, very wrong, like not followed ethical procedures or something, that might be something very, very different. So it's being proportionate as well, I think. So hopefully that's useful. I just want to talk about stakeholders briefly as well. So every project has a set of stakeholders. Some are internal, some are external. I really think it's worth having a stakeholder communications plan as well. So who do you want to engage with and inform about your project, and what is their role? So for example, you might want to work with your local authority to inform them about the project and tell them what's going on. But on the other hand, you might want to work with your internal university or organisation to inform them about the project, but then also get feedback from them into what you're doing so that you can make it different or make improvements, whatever. So there are different types of stakeholders that you will have different relationships with, and it's really nice to kind of map those out in terms of who they are, what their role is, and yeah, whether they're somebody you want to inform, somebody you want to work with, somebody you want to disseminate to, somebody you want to engage with towards the end of the project to deliver something. So there's lots of different types of stakeholders, and it's nice to be very clear what they're going to need from the project and when, at what point during the project. So just to mention that, and you can make quite a nice table with that in so that everyone is very clear what their expectations are. And you will find stakeholders are quite different between the different countries as well. So you might have a different set of stakeholders in Serbia than what you would have in the UK. So it's, yeah, just important to think about that. And your funder is one of your stakeholders as well. So they're both internal and external. So to add that there. Communication and dissemination. So you will have written a lot of this in your proposal. However, things change and projects change. So it's really important, communication and dissemination from an EU's perspective, because it's one of their biggest ways to promote what they do and what the Horizon Europe programme is funding, and Horizon 2020 and their ERDF funding, all their funding that they have. It's a really useful way for them to promote it. It should be a priority for the project. So social media and whatever it might be, you know, it is really important and it should be a priority. It shows the benefits of your project, both for your country, your region, and from a European perspective in terms of social and economic development. It helps to ensure transparency on how EU funds are spent, because at the end of the day, this is public money paid for by all the different countries, probably from taxes or whatever it might be. So it really does need to be transparent and show good value for money, you know. And as I say, it makes EU funding support much more visible in individual countries. It's really funny. So obviously we have Brexit and things, which we'll just put over there for now. But when I've visited countries like Poland, and I've seen things being built, there's really big signs everywhere saying this is funded by European Union funding, and maybe it's the same in Serbia, I don't know. You know, this is being funded by this particular funding from the EU, and we wouldn't be able to do it without them. Yeah, we don't have that in the UK. It's like a tiny little sign in the corner that's maybe got an EU flag on it. It's definitely a lot less prominent, which I don't think has helped the state of affairs that we find ourselves in now. So some basics around good communication around your project. So your communication activities should be timely. So if you've suddenly got a great result, that's a good time to be promoting something. If you've got an event coming up or you're publishing something, that's great. Information should be really accurate. So don't make mistakes in it, because that's not helpful for anyone in terms of promoting your project. And target the right audience. So going back to some of that stakeholder mapping, who are the right people to tell this information to? Because you might want to tell something very different to the general public that you're telling the journal that you're trying to publish in. So there's different ways of getting the information out there. And it might be, so at Loughborough, we've got a really good PR team who do a lot of our kind of social media for the university. So some of your organisations might have marketing people who might be able to support in some way, or at least provide some advice perhaps. So take advantage of that expertise, because I'm certainly not a marketing expert. So I don't know what the current best practice is, but other people within your organisations might do, and that would be helpful. Messaging should be of interest to the audience that you're trying to target, and activities should be appropriate in terms of resources spent and expected impact. Basically, don't spend £1 million, €1 million on a brochure that is not really going to go anywhere, because that's just a waste of money. So think carefully about what you're spending and on what and why before you do it. So some of this should be in the project plan anyway, but some of it might not be. So just making sure it's all appropriate, really. Some suggestions of who to target with some of your communications. So the European Commission and related organisations or people to that are particularly relevant to your project or your programme. Decision makers in your field. The final beneficiaries of the research. So who is it that's going to kind of benefit from the project once it's completed, and providing information to them at various points. National, regional and local authorities and bodies. So you might want to make them very aware of what it is you're doing. The general public, absolutely, and the media. So the media is a really good way to get in touch with the general public as well. So just some suggestions there about who that might include. Try and use a mix of like traditional and new media. So social media is great. Obviously, you guys have set up some really good things on Twitter and LinkedIn and things around this project, which is great. Facebook, have we got a Facebook page? I think, did you say? Yeah. So those are really helpful, but then so is local media, and they'll be really interested. So when I worked on a project with Poland, when we were there, they invited all the local media along, and they were like filming us doing some of our presentations, and it made it onto like the local news, which was a really nice way of promoting the project to like the regional level rather than it being like to everyone. There might be public events related to your project as well, leaflets and brochures, all sorts of things really, and websites as well. So there's all sorts of things you can do, and communication methods. Branding is really important for the project. So we've got a great logo for this project. It's really distinctive and it makes it stand out. Not everyone thinks to do that, but it's really helpful for making sure that all your communication is very clear where it's from and from that particular project. And be creative with your communications, you know. There's all different things you can do. As I say, I'm not an expert in this area, but there are people that are much more expert than me that might have some really good ideas about how you can do this. local media as well, as I've mentioned, and consider the cultures of the groups that are being targeted. So you might want to go a completely different direction when you're promoting it locally to when you're talking to the people within the EC. So just bearing in mind the cultures and the way people work in those particular areas that you're targeting. I'm just going to very briefly mention this, which is just around project reporting and deliverables, and just making sure you know what's required and when as a project management function, because that's your responsibility if you're managing the project, to be able to make sure those are delivered on time, and knowing what they are and how they're submitted and what system they need to be submitted on, how long they need to be, etc., etc. And just a couple of references. So this document here, which is called PM2, was produced from a European project, and it's basically a manual for managing EU projects, and it's super helpful. I don't know if anyone's used it, but you can just find it on the internet, and there's loads of stuff in there about how to do different things within an EU funded project. So it can be really, really helpful to have a look at that. And the other side is just a screenshot from the EU portal, which has loads of manuals and step-by-step things about how to do various things in relation to your project, particularly around kind of the financial reporting and deliverable reporting. So just have a look at these things and see what might be useful for you to look at, particularly at the beginning of your project, so that you're really clear on what you need to do where and when. So that's a very brief whistle-stop tour of my experience in project management.